Hello! Creature Design, How Monsters Change with Time, by Unnatural History Channel, is most generously described as a Trojan horse video, and can be less generously described as a bit of a piss take. The phrase, "it's just my opinion," is often used as a get out of jail free card for people who haven't thought through what they just said. I imagine the author of this video would want to keep that card handy, because bloody hell he says some bollocks here. Granted, it's not all bollocks. The video starts by analysing the design of Vermithrax from the film Dragon Slayer, and how it influenced future dragon designs. It goes on to other fantasy genres including Doctor Who and zombies, then for some reason starts talking about how the story of King Kong doesn't work in the modern day. An odd segue to say the least, one that doesn't really fit into the previous 17 minutes of the video. But it all becomes abundantly clear why this is here when he stumbles his way onto talking about Godzilla. Our boy Goji is brought up at the 19-minute mark, so Unnatural History Channel can waffle nonsensically about him for about 4 minutes. It was so painful to listen to, I decided to go through what he said and tear it to fucking shreds. Let's begin.
This occurs most typically when he's put in conjunction with Godzilla, and often abandons the original story and theme in favour of two monsters punching each other a lot.
Funny how the themes of Kong keep getting brought up of late. It is more than easy to see the original themes of both Godzilla and Kong in their 1962 outing. You just have to watch the film, or remember it, depending on when you last watched it. Let's hold on to that nugget for a moment.
The other joint king of kaiju, Godzilla himself, has decidedly flopped around with theme and role in story of late.
I like how he says "of late," as if Godzilla hasn't constantly changed and adapted with every new director, writer, and global situation throughout his cinematic existence. Nuclear weapons, pollution, bullying, climate change? He gets given a lot to do. Applying that description purely to modern iterations is very selective, or short-sighted, or a sneaky tactic. We'll see.
The excellent first Godzilla was a sombre allegory for nuclear weapons, with the big G effectively being a living, walking nuke, and the very methods of its defeat being wrought with moral uncertainty. Following this, sequels featuring Anguirus and Kong and the rest were best summed up as Godzilla et al., being more about Godzilla punching other monsters than having a tone anywhere near that of the first film.
It is true Godzilla films in the Showa era moved away from the original's dark overtones for a lighter, family-friendly environment. Other films from the other eras did the same. That being said, it wasn't entirely happy-go-jolly in the Showa era, with some rather dark messages presented here and there. And that's not mentioning the more recent eras. And who can forget when Godzilla 2014 was released, people declared it a return to form, a direct tonal resonance to the original Godzilla. Apparently this guy.
Which is not to say that all of them are bad. Some are pretty enjoyable as films on their own merits, as are a fair few of the other Toho creations. More recent Goji flicks and kaiju flicks in general have tried to bake some theming and allegory into their monsters, and the operative word is tried, as almost every single one of them fumbles the bag each time. 2014 Godzilla simultaneously tries to make him an avatar of climate change, nuclear threat, and nuclear salvation, and then the rest of the Monsterverse generally can't make its mind up on this either.
How were those messages fumbled exactly? I'd like to take this moment to point out that at the start of this video, when Unnatural History was talking about Vermithrax and its influences, he brought up quotes as evidence. He even puts the link to a bunch of them on screen. But when talking about Godzilla and Kong, he offers absolutely nothing. He says Godzilla 2014 fumbled its themes, but offers no evidence, no clips, not even descriptions of how it fumbled. Bloody hell, it's my Godzilla reviews video all over again. In case Unnatural History or any of his viewers see this, the Monsterverse is all about the negative impacts of humanity on nature, how those impacts return to affect us in turn, and what humanity should do to prevent them, all in rather dramatic fashion. This is a pretty old theme, and arguably is in Godzilla 1954. Nuclear energy and weapons fit into this theme. Climate change fits into this theme. It can and has been applied to many subjects in the Godzilla franchise over the years, and will continue to be so for many years to come, I imagine. The Monsterverse is but another set of Godzilla films using it, and in my opinion, using it well. I have plenty of videos on the subject to evidence said opinion. Just because one dipstick on the internet thinks this is a new thing and has been done badly, doesn't make it so. It really comes across as if Unnatural History remembers these films from his childhood and hasn't watched them lately, so all he can remember of them is the monsters punching each other a bit.
Only Shin Godzilla gets closest to matching the tone and substance of the original, because Shin Godzilla knew what it wanted to say, drawing much more from recent natural and nuclear disasters than wartime ones, and most of all of the useless and stifled government response to such disasters. Shin Godzilla's symbolism is clear, and is a lot more than wouldn't it be cool if two monsters hit each other.
Oh dear, someone went with general opinion on this one. I've said enough about how Shin Godzilla ain't great, and there are others better than I who have pointed out how it's a terrible comparison to Godzilla. This statement also makes me wonder if Unnatural History has watched Shin Godzilla lately, drawing on recent events rather than old ones, like the Hiroshima bombing and World War II generals. The Monsterverse naturally includes references to the bombings in its narrative. Shin Godzilla jams them in like it's a pickaxe to the face. Then of course there's my recent ramble video where I talk about how actual events expose Shin Godzilla's social commentary as balked to fuck. Funny how a film that appears deep but is only surface level gets a lot of praise from people compared to films that are actually deep and meaningful. It's almost like Shin Godzilla gets praised by people who don't think about it too much.
As overall, being giant avatars of destruction or other story tools, giant kaiju just work best with symbolism behind them. Otherwise you wind up with a lot of flashing lights but no real substance.
Shin Godzilla's laser scene is wanked over all the time online for very, very superficial reasons. Never mind the scene doesn't make sense and ruins a reveal later. Look how cool it looks! And I agree that giant monsters are great avatars and symbols for themes and messages, kind of like how the Monsterverse monsters are, if you actually think about the film for more than 5 seconds rather than regurgitating what everyone else says about them. They're even better at being avatars and symbols when they act with personality and drive, rather than slabs of multicoloured concrete.
As said, some films do try to say something, but it's abundantly clear it's a tacked on message, and has no real bearing on things. The most frequent one we see in this regard is of course climate change, with a lot of kaiju having tangential connections to it because they come from the sea or something similarly limp-wristed. As said as well, in this regard there has been some attempt to tie Godzilla to this theme, in a botched fashion, but still. And this is one evolution I don't think should happen.
The fuck is he talking about? Again, if he had some evidence for this, a quote or something we could examine, this would be so much easier. Instead we're listening to word salad and empty utterances. Okay, you don't think this evolution works because you think it's botched. Tell me why you think it's botched, or we can't talk about it. Civilizations have been connecting natural disasters to gods for millennia, and the Monsterverse Titans are being depicted as those gods come to life. The Monsterverse is not only using ancient, tried and tested metaphors, but updating them with new inspirations. Bloody hell, is he complaining about creativity now?
As the most famous kaiju of all, Godzilla is the algae in the pond of public attention, soaking up all the oxygen of media consciousness whilst everyone else dies around him. With countries getting nuclear weapons / deterrence all the time, and the worth of nuclear power being discussed more and more, using Goji as an analogue for all things nuclear is never going to go out of fashion, yet can be constantly changed depending on the context. Discussion of nuclear fission and its uses and Godzilla in film are never going to go away. He doesn't need to have new themes tacked on, just be adjusted along with his main one.
So basically what is happening in the Monsterverse? He's still a nuclear allegory, as are the rest of the monsters to varying degrees, and he has other metaphors and themes adjusted to work with his main one. Again, it's my Godzilla reviews video all over again. He's asking for something he was just given after having complained about it.
Making him a weird avatar of the natural world like the Monsterverse version feels like ignorance of his origins. And just as Kong is best as a pre-war kaiju, so too is Godzilla best as a post-war one in just about every aspect. Funny how attempts to take them out of their respective time zones and combine them seem to invariably result in hokum.
Funny how doing just that made them remembered for generations to come, and eternal symbols of clashing cultures. Funny how this video started out describing how things can change for the better, only to then declare that Kong and Godzilla shouldn't change at all ever. Funny how the original Godzilla was literally representative of a scarred and tormented nature lashing out at humanity. Funny how the Monsterverse, up until more recent entries anyway, has Godzilla's origins heavily embedded in its narrative. Funny how Unnatural History doesn't seem to know what the fuck he's talking about.
Similarly, the current and looming threat of climate change should ideally be given to either a brand new monster, or reinvigorating an old nobody in a new light. Lots of IPs in fiction in general are trying to incorporate it and failing drastically by either not being aware of what they want to say, not knowing enough about climate change, or how to use it as a symbol. As obviously the next big thing to be represented in fiction, it's a fruit that still remains low-hanging yet pretty ripe for the picking. Someone has to get it right at some point soon, surely.
You mean like an old baddie monster embodying all the worst repercussions of man-made climate change, and an old goody monster representing the proper use of nuclear power and how it can be used to prevent such calamities, like Ghidorah and Godzilla in King of the Monsters. I could probably say a lot more on this video and its terrible, terrible ideas, but I think the last few lines really put things into perspective.
This was another smaller video I made as I was still pretty busy, and wanted something easier to make and write and put out. This also stems from an earlier script I started on Vermithrax before I realised it wasn't quite big enough for a full-length video, and so it got partially adapted here instead. Plus I had to at least briefly mention Godzilla at least once on the channel.
So this was an undeveloped video filled with undeveloped thoughts on an undeveloped subject with some other stuff tacked on because he thought it would be cool. Wait a minute, isn't this whole video what he was just complaining about? What a fucking hypocrite. In short, first 15 minutes of Unnatural History Channel's video on creature design is good and interesting. The rest should be avoided at all costs because it's uninformed, unthought through bollocks. At least it gave me something to make a video on, I suppose. It also gives us some lessons to take away. Remember, always think about what people are saying. Don't just accept it at face value. If people present opinions as fact, get them to explain why. If they don't, or can't, ignore the bastards. This is apparently Unnatural History's first video about Godzilla, and it was awfully undercooked and lacking. Perhaps in the future he might put some more effort in. I, on the other hand, have plenty of videos on my channel talking about Godzilla, so you can find evidence for my opinions there. Last but not least, thank you for watching.